Sure thing. Yeah. Kate.
Thank you. This is really interesting. It seems to me that one important distinction between these different groups is how they're framing the sort of subject of food security, whether it's about an individual being able to access sufficient adequate calories, or whether it's about the security of a food system. So, for example, I kind of get the impression that some of the corporate and government actors are saying, do we have a sustainable agro industry here? And those perspectives, that focus seems to have really different implications, especially because at times there can be contradictions, right? If you have this really sustainable agricultural industry that exports all the food that's produced locally overseas, that can really reduce local food security. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts about those different definitional sort of conceptions of whose food security we're talking about.
Right, yeah. I think, well, I can take one aspect on that, and this would be actually returning to the civil society perspectives here. And civil society actors, I think, are really the only actors in terms of the writing that we've reviewed that link. So if they're talking about incomes, for example, or inequalities, like inequality of access to land, they will link that to inequality of access to land and to sufficient food, or food sufficient for a life that I would value. So they were generally pretty good at linking the various dimensions of food security together, whereas corporate communications, government communications, even communications from multilateral actors, if it was on nutrition, it was sticking on nutrition, and there wasn't much attention to these other aspects of food security. So if availability, accessibility, if we buy DeShooter's framework, and these are the three dimensions of food security that are worth talking about in this context, and we've got these stakeholder viewpoints. I think it's civil society groups who really shine through as the only ones who are trying to develop their thinking on linkages between the various aspects. I don't know, did you have something you wanted to maybe add to Kate's question? Because I don't think I got to half of it.
Well, I generally agree with what you're saying, because with the government and so with the government perspective, for example, they're promoting, say, palm oil production, they're just promoting palm oil production without contextualizing it in terms of palm oil production for what? So palm oil production for export, or palm oil production for internal consumption. And I think a lot of the literature, which also goes back to the civil society, which was a lot of stuff in Cameroon was about the Heracles farm. And there was a critique about how, promoting palm oil production, Cameroonians don't necessarily need more palm oil, which is just part of you using it to cook. Cameroonians don't need it in terms of ensuring food security, but if you're promoting major palm oil production, that would be just for export. And so, and even in terms of looking at the food specifics, it's mostly within the civil society groups that you hear talking about cassava, gari, so really drilling into the actual foods that people eat and really talking about them. Meanwhile, the government would just be talking about extension without necessarily contextualizing in terms of, okay, the Southwest province, there's this type of dietary specific need, and that's what we should focus on in that region. They're just talking about extension in general and promoting Cameroon open for business.
Yeah, I mean, sticking with the palm oil too, you've got civil society actors who would absolutely challenge this government opinions on the need for more palm oil investment, or the fact that it could be sustainable. But they would also say that you could actually make Cameroon, for example, currently has a palm oil deficit, so they're importing palm oil to meet the needs that people are demanding in the market. And civil society groups suggest that smallholders could just be capacitized with little investments in some transformation technology, and you're going to fix the palm oil deficit almost instantly, because a lot of it's just rotting on the street and not actually getting to people who want it. So civil society would talk about that kind of little direct intervention that would have a big impact, whereas governments are looking to the big, Olam, which is one of the world's biggest commodity firms, is interested in going back up the chain. They don't want to just be trading commodities, they now want to produce it. And they also want to produce the inputs. So they're building a fertilizer plant in Libreville, and now they're also expanding upon their palm oil plantation there. So there's some serious inattention to linkages from governments, and I think the multilateral organizations are kind of guilty of it too, at least in the literature we reviewed. 50.
Do you find if perspectives of one stakeholders are influenced by others, that civil society's perspectives are influenced by the donors' point, because they do collaborative research and
Well, I mean, it's a good point, because I think there are some aspects of our data that we still haven't even gotten to take a look at. Another way of analyzing our data would be to take a look at multilateral reports or bilateral reports and see how many civil society reports are cited within those. So that's another way that we could really address that question, I think. But I do think that voicing is very distinct here between multilateral, say if we stick with that one, and civil society groups. And it's, if you talk about adequacy, it's this overarching focus on nutrition, and civil society groups who are very much more connected to agricultural areas and where areas where investments are planned or proposed. Oftentimes not just talking about nutrition, but again, trying to link that to other issues of, well, are people going to be able to afford food once this project is put into place? The multilateral might focus on sustainability and the sustainability of that proposed oil palm project. It's on everybody's mind in Central Africa, in Central Africa generally. I think these very large agricultural projects, but multilaterals don't seem to be making the link, that jump to let's talk about these other aspects and the impacts. So I'm not sure if I answered your question. We got to look at the data again. I think that's the short answer.
That's a question about why this touches on the very end of the presentation. You said that one of your future research questions is the voices of regular people. I can think of a lot of reasons why that might matter. My hunch is also that is a really neglected part of research on food security. I want to know why you think it matters, particularly if one of the implications of the research I think that you've done is that there aren't really that many effective mechanisms for mediating the conflicting perspectives of existing stakeholders, all of whom have much more power than regular people. So if multilateral organizations are sometimes sidelined, like why do you think it's important that we hear the voice of regular people? Is there some chance that their voices might count in policy design at some future stage? I'm just curious to know why you want to know about the voices of regular people.
Good. I think in terms of the importance of the household perspective, or individual perspective, I think first of all they are the ones who were experiencing the food insecurity, and I think Adam mentioned the fact that most of these reports were elite reports, so people who are living good lives in Yaoundé and all the rest, and who could afford the food. But meanwhile, if you're talking to a regular person on the streets in Boya who goes to the market and feels the price differential, and really experience the fact that people are coming from Gabon, which is doing well or doing better, coming from Equatorial Guinea doing better, and buying up the food that they previously could afford, then you kind of get a different message in terms of what food, first of all, in terms of food preference, what food did you want to buy, and why is it not available, and what season is not available, and all of those little nuances which would come out from the household perspective. Just for example, I think the other example that I would give would be looking at, because I did my research in Botswana, looking at the perspective from when they did the household survey and I did my own household survey versus when they did the first phase of the work was just similar to what we did, which is looking at literature and kind of looking at perspectives. You talk about, for example, Botswana, food secure, because if you're looking at availability, access, looking at government reports, they might have a deficit in terms of production, but they imported enough, so everything is good. But when you talk to the households, people are telling you, well, yeah, there's food on the shelves, but I can't afford it. Or I can only afford maize meal and instant soup every day. And so you start getting into a different type of food security, I would say, which is more about what people's perspective or people's own qualitative interpretation of whether they are full or satisfied with their food.
But that's about their concrete experience.
Yes, the concrete experience.
That's different from their views on food security, and that's kind of what I was curious. I understand that the input is very important, that you need to know on the ground what the situation is, but why, in addition to that, do you suggest that you might be interested in knowing what everyday people's perspectives on food security are, like which aspects they, I don't know, I suppose there's a lot
I think any part of it is to try to get the perspective of people out there, just in general. I mean, there's Mo Ibrahim's prize for good governance in Africa wasn't awarded again. This is the 4th time out of 7 years, so this last month. This is the prize given to leaders after they leave power and have demonstrably changed the economy in ways that could potentially be considered to be positive for people. Well, in CEMAC, you've got this kind of persistence of authoritarian rule, like Nguesso basically pushed his cousin out. Sorry, I'm thinking about Obiang. Obiang, yeah. So the president of Equatorial Guinea has been in about 30 years. Paul Biya is 31 years. Denis Sassou Nguesso in Congo-Brazzaville was recycled from a previous, he's been in 19 years total. People in Libreville, I mean, Bongo too is in charge in Libreville, but he wasn't necessarily elected in a free and fair election the other year. So there's some real questions about the ability of people in power there to even hear their own people and get that information out. I mean, the media is not necessarily free. Government newspapers don't cover wouldn't cover any of this. So getting some of this information out to a community of researchers, that here's actually what real people are thinking. Might have some impact, at least among the elites that we're reviewing in this study. Now, where some of this comes from is also from Lauren's research on biome sellums in the markets in Cameroon, talking about, maybe if you wanted to.
No, but also households themselves. So I did a lot of interviews in households and biome sellums. And if the perspectives of these stakeholders are marginalized, then the perspectives of these households are absolutely marginalized and not heard in this case, especially when it comes to food security. Though households are being interviewed to talk about climate change, or what's your experience of climate change, what's happening with the weather, but no one knows at this point, in terms of research, what people's experiences of food security and insecurity in the household are. So what are the particular coping strategies that people in CEMAC adopt when prices rise or when plantains disappear to neighboring countries, and et cetera? So I think shifting to the voice of the people, I think, was kind of interesting, because this approach that we've taken here with this paper is entirely new. And so going, and I think bringing the funnel down a little further to the household level is even newer.
I mean, a short answer to the question again is, people were telling you last summer in survey data that they don't feel food secure unless they've got access to traditional forest foods. And so the forest Congo Basin literature has kind of overwhelmed food security attention to the region as a whole. That's one of the rationales for a project. But I think there is a definite felt need for foods from the forest that might be commercialized, that might be able to be domesticated, but people aren't getting access to that now. It's cheaper to go and eat imported rice and fish from China with a little imported tomato. That's the cheapest blade in the market right now. And so whether or not an economist would say, well, that's crazy, people, the revealed preference is for rice. Why are you talking about what people, or if Dee's laughing, I don't know if any other economists are in the room right now. Yes, there is one right here. Yeah. So hopefully that gets at some of your questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.